Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Kame House with the 2MK team. We are back from Shine in the Dragon Ball sense, even though only one of us actually competed in the tournament, and that was just to see the level of competition. It was high. But now that we've managed to get through Shine, you're going to be seeing more of our involved and direct training in this game as well, given that we will no longer be quite as focused on Street Fighter. So everyone has their own little specific things that they've been aiming for lately. The rest of the team has been much more often working on their positioning and combos, whereas I've been specifically working on how best to use my team and their various moves of flying. So you're likely to see a lot more of the team's actual attack style. And some specific things related to changing characters to get certain positions. Mainly, we've been looking at better combos and team synergy from Just Fine side. And understanding that using my assist is not really one of the focuses of my team. Given the amount of time I can manage to usually buy with my characters, but they're otherwise relatively low appearing synergy, there's a different way to deal with this situation. Specifically, the fact that they work better when they finish each other's combos. There's also some spacing things that can be built up based on the intention to switch at particular moments. The team gets trickier and trickier as they advance in that aspect of their play. Multiplying the defense in this manner helps more than trying to use their assist to cover space or directly extend the combo of the on-screen character. Normally, the on-screen character, you have a fairly clear idea of how their combos work and how you want to finish them off, with the main idea being that the character on the screen is the one on the screen because they do the most damage, or something else. But there are definitely team setups where your aim is closer to the other side. The synergy of the team depends on manipulating your opponent's position and doing that by getting an advantage with whatever character is the best for the space that they're in, and then maximizing damage by calling a different one. This isn't the easiest thing to do though, given that it stops you from being able to play a very pressure-heavy game. In short, utilizing Android 18 to open up people, for example, and finishing the combo with Frieza means that if Frieza gets into trouble, he no longer is able to call 18 for some time to finish his combos. This is generally only a problem if your characters don't have very strong defense skills. Above all else, this helps you confuse most opponents, as they're never knowing who they're going to be fighting or where they should be aiming their attacks. The system also helps with characters who have ranged knockdowns in the air, forcing the opponent to not quite know where to recover to. However, this does of course require a lot more understanding of the timing of particular aspects of the match. Paying very close attention to your opponent's meter, their spacing on the screen, and your own is required if you want to play in this style, whereas understanding block strings, pressure, and defense are the requirements for playing the other way. It's also one of those things that is more difficult to train in training mode, simply because so much of it is dependent on either reading or tricking the opponent. And in terms of the combos, most of the time you just want to make sure that you don't drop this combo on the switch. But switching in your combo is not necessarily too difficult to do. Perfecting the timing, especially when you've gotten a good combo into the air, would be good, but it's still not that necessary. So now let's look at it simply this way. Both 18 and Piccolo are much better off with Frieza finishing their air combos, and Frieza is better off, since his combos don't tend to send the opponent as aerial as you prefer, handing it over to one of the other two to push forward. The easy way to tell whether or not this sort of thing works for your team is simply to understand which of them attack well from the air and put the opponent into positions you want from the air attacks, or which ones have to do it from the ground. For example, in a lot of situations, Nappa would be better off calling Cell to finish his combos. But Nappa also has enough range to set up a lot of situations for said combos. Similarly, if Cell manages to land a hit on the ground, sometimes he can't convert into a combo at all, but a switch into Vegeta, who has long-range specials, would allow for just about anything he wanted to happen. In the case of Vegeta or Cell calling Nappa, we've already established that in those cases that is something you generally want to do as an assist, because Nappa helps both of them finish their combos or control their block strikes. There may, however, be one or two combos where they are better off having Nappa finish it. You can already see the strong capacity given by the switch in from Vegeta off Nappa's combos because of the bounce. Nappa himself can't do anything there, but Vegeta can. Note that these things are not usually true combos, and the opponent will be able to block or get out. The thing you're aiming for mostly is control and mix-ups. If you simply don't like what you were going to get on the ground, it really doesn't matter giving up the possibility of actually continuing a combo, because there would either be no combo to continue, or the damage would be so small that you don't actually care. The other limitation of this is, of course, the limitation on any assist-based motion. Your assist needs to be ready. But there you see, Cell has managed to knock the opponent away with his good neutral, but has no real way to convert off that puppet. However, he's created a lot of space, and the creation of that space is really good for Nappa. Similarly, while Nappa will find it relatively difficult to get anywhere here, had he managed to open the opponent up, it would have been a good time to call the assist he had. And he can call him again immediately, given that he wasn't sparking. So, Just Fine made the decision of just calling the assist anyway, knowing that if Nappa eventually did land a hit, the sparking blast would have recharged it enough to mean that it would still be there. It would still be possible to do all of the conversions. The other advantage to this form of play is that you often end up at a relatively heavy meter advantage. Meaning that even if you couldn't necessarily solve all your problems in the direct way, you get to do things like this. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to win this sort of thing from here without being extremely daring. That said, if not for the Krillin level 3, that could have turned really ugly on Omni Rabbit's side fairly fast. So do remember that even though team synergy is one of the things that people consider to be extremely important in this game, You can create your own forms of it, at least to some extent. Assists don't always have to extend combos in the standard way. They can be used to actually switch in and change the position you get from your combos.
It's time to face your opponent.
The easy way to remember this is simply that your forward plus assist is a switch, and your down forward plus assist is to call the assist. For most situations of execution, this is the easiest way to deal with your problem. Of course, up back and assist, if you were doing certain types of air combos, is a problem, and you will have to go from the up back to the forward in order to make it work. That said, it's just one more piece of small execution that you can add to your game.
Get ready. Fight it out.
You can easily see that once the team has fallen apart, playing this style of team becomes much harder since you cannot continue or finish your combos in the correct way, even though all of the defensive skills that you would have carried over from before are still intact.
It's time to face your opponent.
Since this is another aspect of the game that doesn't rely so much on understanding combos specifically, you're still not going to see much optimization there. Which is good because, as always, this is a beginner lobby. For the most part. Our players are moving into intermediate, but they're still practicing beginner level things in a lot of cases. In my case, I'm still aware that my opponents still don't have a strong concept of how to open up or attack. Meaning that a lot of this should really be spent doing a lot less work. As my opponents are much more likely to just defend and wait for me to make a mistake with characters who often have unsafe options. But I don't really have to make most of those mistakes. The rest is a matter of conditioning your opponent very slowly. Until they become frantic and do something that you can manage to actually beat. This of course can take a while to condition. And your opponent can always take actions you don't expect, but you do have to learn over time how best to handle that aspect of it.
A fierce showdown is about to begin!
So, given who I'm facing today and what I'm trying to achieve as a whole, let's shift a little bit toward that. With much less activity and much more watching.
Ready? Fight it out!
生意気だよお前。そこですか。そこですか。吹き飛べ。
軽いね。
動け動け。
もっと楽しむ。
頼むベジータ。ゲームして。
手を抜いているのかい？まだまだ。やるね。大丈夫。
こいつの
しちゃった。
変わる。
加減が難しいんだよ。頼んだよ。
甘いですよ。宇宙の塵にしてやる。ここですよ。まずはその調子。生意気だよお前。そろそろ死にたい。生意気だよお前。生意気だよお前。生意気だよお前。ちょっと脅してやる。そろそろ死にたいだろ。そろそろもうここまでだ。
勝たせてもらうよ。まだまだ。
喜べ兄弟。
手を抜いているのかい？まだまだ。
くだらん。
しまった。17号。死ななっときな。
この世には存在しないんだ。
こいつはどう
やるね。どこ見てんのか。感謝なんかしてない。
そろそろ死にたい。生意気だよお前。その調子。生意気だよお前。そろそろ死にたいだろ。そこですか。
殺せるぜ。
生意気だよお前。ちょっと脅してやるか。
動け動け。
ちょっと脅してやるか。
殺せるぜ。
そこで。
すぐに終わらせてやる。
そろそろ死にたいだろ。ここですよ。甘いですよ。
うるさいね。
The long-range normals on the characters I'm playing lend themselves to this strategy well, because you can convert from much further, but if you're no longer confident in being able to get a good combo off that, just convert into an assist use from as far as you can.
Time to begin the match. Hmm. トランクス、私をがっかりさせないでくれよ。
お前を殺すぞ、セル。
Get ready.
消えろ。
さてと。
トランクス、大丈
Basic and the utilization of Nappa as an assist to help with a block string that wasn't going to go in the correct direction. Sometimes when you're playing neutral for a relatively long time, it's good to know how to rotate through your assist to keep the situation in your favor. Similarly, understanding how long you can keep up a good defense with a particular character, either because your opponent does not want to come near them, or because your opponent has exhausted their good pressure options, helps you know how long you can wait and try to get back an assist to keep up your own style of play. Furthermore, making it such that your opponent consistently expects you to switch at those times means that their timing may be off and it may be easier to get certain combos on them because they will recover differently or just not try certain things at all. Generally, most characters that don't have a good downward smash attack that they can follow up at the end of their air combo are good candidates for bringing in someone with some sort of downward air move that can actually do something. This is of course particularly useful for characters who don't have air supers in the first place. But note that it really might not be all that necessary if your character gets good knockdown pressure. It is through exploring these different styles of play that you can open up your perspective on which teams are useful and what your perception of team synergy means. After all, switching and assists are on the same timer. The main question is, how often does your character manage to get an opening?
The battle's about to start. Good luck!
せやこれならどうせや覚悟はいいか覚悟はいいか
勝ったるね。手を抜いているのかい。
くだらん
そら逃げたって逃げてもいいよ。
どうして人暴れしてやるかこいつの挨拶代わり
私を本気にやるね。やるね。
どこなくちゃな
こいつはどうだい。
終わりだ無駄だ覚悟はいいかおのれ覚悟はいいかこの程度かこれならどうだくそ砕け散れ無駄だ
Note, of course, the massive meter advantage was both obtained and all that.
そろそろ死にたいだろ。この星もろとも皿をゴミにすその程度ですか。いいですよ。出番ですよ。
まだやっぱり強い。勝たせてもらうよ。くらえ。逃げたく逃げてもいいよ。身の程はっしまった
防げまいこの私にバリーを口を叩けなくしてやるぜ。
今度はこっちからやらせてもらうよ。どうだい。こっちだよ。そこちょっと脅して
動け動け
つながどうだ。
殺せるぞ。
どうだい。まずはその調子。そろそろ死にたいだろ。飛べきゃ
ごときにそう楽しませてもらおう。
見なさい。
せいぜい楽しませてくれよ。
黙らせてやるぞ。
少しはやるようだな。
今すぐ黙らせてやるぞ。そろそろ本気を出しましょう。どうだ。なるほど。虫けらしまった。飛べ。その程度ですか。そこだ。ちょっと宇宙の塵にしてやる。ここですか。そろそろ本気を出しましょう。なるほど。その調子。そろそろ本気を出しましょう。
この程度か。
そこしまった。
全体に
貴様が相手か。
ほらすらどうだ。しまった。覚悟しろビッグバンガー。ここですよ。ここですよ。
Understanding which of your characters has the most control over the match and the remaining character's health is also important in these sorts of matchups.
何が目的かは知らんが、俺が貴様を信用することなどない。
Build your strategy around your perception of your opponent's capabilities. And worry about your team's synergy in terms of your execution once you've managed to master that.
Time to begin the match! It's all or nothing! This is a risky strategy, primarily because losing Frieza by any bad luck would mean that it would be difficult to play out the rest of the match. Meaning that technically, despite having the life lead and not being too far down on meter, that was functionally a much worse situation than we'd expected to be. While he is much better at handling an annoying Piccolo and Genie than he is at dealing with Frieza. Meaning had I failed to actually do that, it would be really difficult to close this out.
殲滅する立て直す
逃げたけどやるね行くよ17号分かった分かったじゃあねバイ勝たせてもらうよまだまだもっと楽しもうかほらこいつはどうだい食らえうわ
You can see it ended up getting a lot closer than one would want,
今回は私たちの勝ちだね
based on having the wrong characters in position.
これが元神の力ってやつかあんた自身はあんまり神様らしくないけど
また一匹虫けら Are you ready? Fight it out! この攻撃だ来い殺す
どうした許さんぞ許さんぞ
俺が殺してやるもう終わりか殺してやる
お前の思い通りにはさせん問題ないじゃあ少しだ問題ないスピードには自信があるんだ地球ごと消えてんだこの程度か
誤算だったな。頼ってばかりはいられない。これからも俺のこの手で勝つんだ。
A fierce showdown is about to begin!
また一匹虫けらが死にに来たか。うん。暇つぶしにはなるかな。
It's all or nothing! Let's go!
もう終わりか。さてと無駄だ。カメハメハ。おけばか野郎。なんぞ。来い。もう。なんなんだ。さてさてと。さて。次の砕け中。この私にバリーやる。無駄だ。はあ。そこは譲ってやる。立て直す。そろそろ。そこだな。だ。さて。次の砕け中。無駄だ。生きて。行くぞ。こっちだ。行くぞ。しまっ。まだだ。せい。頼む。行くぞ。しまっ。まだだ。逃がさん。行くぞ。せい。行くぞ。あとは突っ込んだろ。前。行くぞ。無駄だ。なんだと。
楽しませてもらおうか。さてとこの程度か。手伝え。でっかい。もういい、変われ。飛べ。カメハメハ。遅い。無駄だ。遊びは終わりだ。飛べ。箱だ。殺してやる。飛べ。どうだ。楽しませてもらおうか。にゅっからえ。そろそろ協力してもらおうか。さてし受けてみろ。地球ごと消えてなくなる貴様。カメハメハ。どうしてさて無駄だ。協力してもらおう。この程度か。スピードには自信がある。じゃあこの程度か。おいおい、まだくたばるなよ。もう少し遊ばせろ。スーパーサイヤ人ベジータの野郎、見せつけやがって。
We are, of course, already seeing a relatively large number of changes in strategic positions based on switching versus actually going for an assist. This is something you have to perfect over time, though, because depending on where you hit your opponent, it may shift things. This is particularly useful for adult Gohan, whose combos don't always work properly when the opponent has moved into the air and he's clipped them. Recognizing that this has happened and doing a switch after a good knock-up, which he does have quite a few of, should help you out, as he's not so good at chasing himself, and if he has to super dash to continue his own combos, he normally doesn't have very good knockdown or spacing after. The other team members are almost always better at the job, and in those situations you generally don't want him right back anyway.
さてしま
ですよ。そろそろ死にたいだろ。そこしまった。
When facing this type of opponent, be more careful with attacks that are meant to hit them at spaces you expect them to stay in. Similarly, don't put yourself in really visible positions because they'll tend to attack what they can see in front of them. Playing around with ranges, on the other hand, can be a little bit more useful to you. However, this linear attack style doesn't really work very well against Frieza. Making it relatively easy for him to finish people off with all the meter that's been built up from playing too solidly in the other case. But they're just some things you can't deal with. Or rather, I didn't actually know whether or not that would grab, so I didn't do anything.
Android 16 win.
セル、俺に力を貸してどうするつもりだ。
When using this style of play, there are two things that become very important. Understanding which hit of your combo to do your switch on. And if you miss it, realizing whether or not you should switch at all. You must do this while tracking which character is on which assist button. Which, depending on your assist setup, can be a little bit hard sometimes. Those who tend to use their assists as pressure to help out particular characters will usually have the assists on the same buttons and can get used to that from the very beginning.
その程度ですか。どうだい。ちょっと落としてやるか。そこですよ。皆さんここはお任せします。
はいいか終わりだ。悪運はいいか
見えた。
終わりだ。
よし。
終わりだ。悪運はいいか行くぞ。
こいつはどうだい。食らえ。よし。やばい。もっと楽しもうか。まだ
今度は本気でやらせてもらうぞ。
全力でいくぞ。ここをお願いします。バカだ。行くぞ。はあ。しまった。そこか。終わらせてやる。逃げてもいいよ。逃げろ。驚いたよ。手を抜いているのかい。あんま似合って。
仕方がありませんね。
そら許さんぞ。やるね。許さんぞ。どこ見てんのさ。もっと楽しもうぜ。いい加減にしろ。どうした。手を抜いているのかい。黙っときな。17号。こいつはどうだい。はあ。えりゃ。加減が難しいんだよ。17号。いい加減にしろ。どこ見てんのさ。手を抜いているのかい。どう見てんのさ。逃げてもいいよ。勝たせてもらうよ。くらえ。黙っときな。あんま似合って。やっ。黙っときな。まだ。黙っときな。感謝なんかしてないからな。
今度は死ぬか。宇宙の塵にしてやる。長いつだよお前。
今度は俺が相手だ。
その調子。結果から先に言うとあなたには厳しい戦いになるでしょう。こっちだよ。そろそろ死にたいだろ。今です。
1対1ならこいつ甘い。それでもくら行くぞ。終わりだ。戦いの荒っぽさは父親譲りのようだ。ざまあみやがれ。
The battle's about to start. Good luck!
One important thing about the interactions in this sort of team has to do with whether or not your opponent can zone you out.
Generally, the character that is better at getting through zoning is not also necessarily so great at converting off it. This seems a little odd because you would figure they were rush down style characters, but generally rush down style characters are limited in most fighting games by finding it difficult to get through zoning. While Cell can fight back at long range, he's not the best for getting through zoning. The character who is very good at getting through zoning has an attack that is delayed from the air that goes down toward the opponent. Generally doesn't take too much effort and isn't too unsafe if you do it right. Vegeta therefore has some good options for it, even if he's not the strongest character at the in question. It's important to have more than one approach option on the character, otherwise you're not really going to get through, you're just going to eventually tire your opponent out. Krillin, on the other hand, has very strong zoning if you know how to keep your opponent occupied mentally long enough. Since he neither fears Raw Vanish, nor worries too much about any health that is lost from the opponent doing random level 3 at him, unless that random level 3 also has good knockdown. Krillin is a good zoner even if purely because of his recovery options. Put him on a team with these two, and you have characters who can absolutely make sure that the opponent cannot actually get in, as they will just be called as assists to cover the space that Krillin is not covering. And as we've just seen, any movement underneath him is just met with a Vanish or similar Super Dash to set up situations in Krillin's favor. The main thing you have to remember is not to be discouraged by the fact that you could just get hit by certain things or super dashed on, because being super dashed on in the air for Krillin against the sort of characters you wanted to be zoning in the first place really doesn't bother him as a character that much. In order for them to convert, they often have to convert into level 3 or a lot of assist work, meaning that he can generally just find some time to use a Senzu and reset the situation. Add to this his very good bat dash, both in terms of its invincibility and range, as well as his air one, and it just becomes almost impossible to get in on without using or being willing to use a large amount of resources. Trunks and Adult Gohan, on the other hand, have much more straightforward and obvious zoning options, leaving themselves much more vulnerable for longer and the opponent having ways to get around their stuff. Fortunately for them, the ranges at which they put opponents when they do their zoning are good for both of their attack styles. The key is that unlike most other games where even as your life falls you would want to zone more, in Dragon Ball FighterZ,
Generally, as your health drops, zoning becomes riskier, so it is not something you resort to, it's rather something you start with. It helps you build up meter, and helps frustrate your opponent. This ties back into the other thing we were mentioning. When you know that you have got an opponent where you want to zone them, and you've managed to knock them out or get a good opening up with one of your other characters, but that character isn't necessarily going to be the safest one to continue your pressure with, and they're definitely not going to keep the space or buy the time you need, try to switch into your zoning character immediately from there, give them the space, and do as you need to do. This also minimizes the amount of trouble you can get into if your opponent uses their sparking or a vanish that manages to clip you. Being able to alternate between this and actually using your supers to finish out things is another good way to maximize both your used resources and your comfort in the match. You never have to feel as if you're missing the capacity to do anything at the end of a combo. Either you have meter or you pull the switch. And meter is more or less cheap in this game. This is additionally true because the amount of work that your opponent must spend in terms of their own resources to make sure that you're not taking advantage of them with your switches means you get to build up a lot more varied offense off the meter. Meaning that you get to use your Dragon Rush, and using your Dragon Rush basically refills meter. A lot of fighting games relies on familiarity with situations. Switching at the right time takes away that familiarity relatively quickly.
さあまだウォーミングアップ中か。カメハメハカメハメハ。俺も少しは役に立つかもしれない。そこが見切った。いや少しだ見切った。そこだな。行くぞ。そこがすぐに終わらせてやる。
The big difficulty here is avoiding Sal's level 3, as it will be enough to kill either character.
スピードには自信があるんだ。さて楽しませてもらおうか。くだらん何か。はっぬんカメハメハぬんはあさてしま暇つぶしにはなったな。鉄くずが今さら何の用だ。貴様の力などいらんぞ。
Brace yourself for the coming battle!
So let's see what we can do relative to higher speed. Higher speed creates more scrambles, and more scrambles means that neither player necessarily knows what's going on.
Are you ready? Go!
星もろともその程度か目にしてやる。ほらつだほらつそこまだまだ出番ですよ。
覚悟はいいか。行くぞ。交代だ。
そら黙っときな。手を抜いているのかい。こいつはどうだい。どうしてんのさ。逃げなきゃ逃げ驚いたよ。
なんだって
黙っときな。やっぱり強いね。
お前たちが武士道する
この野郎。加減が難しいんだ。頼んだよ。
今度は死ぬかもね。そろそろそろそろ死にたいだろ。
何か
生意気だよお前。はっ
ふっくらよ。
その
地球ごと消えてなくなれ。
ちょっと脅してやるか。ほらちょっと脅してやるか。ちょっと脅してやるか。虫けらがそろそろ死にたいだろ。しまったね。ちょっと後悔しますよ。生意気だよお前。
調子に乗りやがって。無駄だ。おっと
宇宙の塵にしてやる。
覚悟はいいか。脅かしやがって。せいやおのれ。こいつは挨拶がやばい。
早く勝負をつけなきゃね。まだやっ行くよ17号。
分かった分かった。
As you can see, attacking in this case was again a bad idea. It's unnecessary to do so in this matchup against this particular opponent. So I'll go back to not doing that.
そろそろ死にたいだろ。こっちだよ。結果から先に言うと、あなたには厳しい戦いになるでしょう。ここですよ。なるほど。つながと虫けらがそこですか。生意気だよ生意気だよ生意気だよお前。生意気だよお前。絶対に許さんぞ。おのれ甘いですよ。
無駄だ。
ほらすこの星もろとも貴様をゴミにしてやる。
Don't even know who won. Oh.
中途半端な力を身につけた者はかえって早死にするよ。あなたも多少腕を上げたようですね。盾になる以外でも役に立つじゃありませんか。
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess!
It's absolutely vital not to overcommit to anything with a particular character. If you're playing in this style, you cannot afford to take as many risks, and therefore must play more defensively, just to maintain the team synergy that you're using. Whereas other teams which are more meant to do damage can have one character carry the end of the match, get good openings, and finish off with a big damage. If you're not playing very damaging characters, that meter advantage may not be enough to win in that particular raid. Yet there are characters in the game that are basically designed such that they don't necessarily do big damage, but do have good evasive movement. When zoning with Krillin, be careful not to get yourself too high in the air when you release certain attacks, as your opponent's super dash needs to be blocked by your assist, and if your assist does not have a strong upward hitbox, you may not be able to block it at all. However, they do seem to be adding some characters whose purpose is closer to that. Cooler appears as if he will go well into his zoning style too, even though he is somewhat a grappler himself. And in fact, using the same synergy, that may be his entire purpose. In that when the opponent finally gets in, if you force a switch to cooler, side switch, and escape, you get the zone again. In order to master this from Krillin's side, therefore, you're going to have to learn a lot of that jump and instant jump setups to work into your zoning timings.
俺が相手です。
どうした。
遅い。足にならん。
すぐはすっこだろう。
貴様を通す。この俺だ。このベジータ様を失望させるなよ。足にならん。おていいちゃん。行くぞ。どうだ。足にならん。覚悟しろ。これから見せるのが本当の力だ。消えろ。どけ。ガラス。飛べ。足にならん。覚悟しろ。生きた。待て。やっ。どうだ。軟弱なやつだ。本当に俺の息子なのか怪しいもんだぜ。スーパーサイヤ人になれないサイヤ人など戦力にもならないな。
The battle's about to start. Good luck.
Broly, 生きていたのか。
It's all or nothing.
楽しめそう。
By design and definition, Broly is relatively hard to zone. However, he's not necessarily hard to keep out. You just have to switch your zoning from pure zoning to the style we saw against grapplers in old fighting games. You use just enough zoning style moves to tempt Broly into taking counter zoning actions. This does not apply to 16 given that he has that fast forward EX grab. And while it does not necessarily lead into much, he can be zoned in a more standard way given that he can't get through as easily. Cell is both harder for most characters to zone, and easier for the characters who don't normally zone all that well. The only exception to this is Frieza, who can just zone Cell either way. This is because Frieza is again an evasive zoner who can get into positions and zone from those positions in ways that Cell can't move too well. Kuririn's actually in the same boat. He can do this, it's just harder executionally to do. Fortunately for Krillin, once he's gotten the opponent really convinced that he wants to zone them, his after image is a really good way of getting in from there. And something that they'll usually not be expecting. And if you find that they start expecting it, then just zone one. This does not work as well obviously if your opponent is attempting to zone back at you. But since Krillin has so many ways around that if he really wants, he doesn't have to worry too much about this except against other zoners. It's therefore most important as Krillin to watch and understand your opponent's rhythm and their desires in the match, rather than following a formula of when to do this or when to do that. However, at the end of the day, he does tend to build up the capacity to recover really long with either sparking, using a switch out given the opponent generally won't have anything to do, or obviously, in certain matchups, just healing himself outright. An opponent who is convinced that you want to zone with your Krillin is generally not expecting nor prepared for the sort of offense Krillin can really put up on some characters. By contrast, Adult Gohan has basically the most standard and obvious zoning style. There's no tricky mix-ups in the air, and even though he does have basically a screen crossing instant attack and an uppercut, those are things that functionally are parts of standard zoning. At least as they have been designed for the most part over the years. Unlike Krillin, he's likely to be a lot less tricky about it, and tends to do it more so by spacing himself properly on the ground. However, given how hard he is to challenge at certain places, and the invincibility of said uppercut, as well as having strong supers to push back the opponent, you really can just play like that. The fact that his power-up explosion hits on both sides often handles people who want to vanish, even though it is hard to do this on reaction. Again, you're mostly waiting to try to deal with them when they try to fake you out in some way. And if you learn to recognize their fake outs, and they're counting that you won't have an actual response, then you can deal with it with all the meter you've built up from all your other standard zoning.
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess. Are you ready?
Part of the reason why Frieza's death saucer is actually even a thing is because it really blocks a lot of counter zoning strategies.
Specifically, it buys Frieza time to get into a different position. Not necessarily to continue zoning, but just to make the opponent have to rethink a bunch of stuff they're doing. So while it is not a move that you'd want to use in a standard zoning war, or on opponents who have a really fast way to cross the whole screen other than vanishing, you really want your opponent to whiff things and take advantage of Frieza's long normals to solve your problems. Eighteen zoning is a little bit more straightforward, actually. But more so, she is better at counter zoning by jumping over things at very long ranges. Oh, nice. Regular zoning, similarly, is about more sense of staying out of the way of things. And by most standards can't be considered zoning at all. However, it's not completely wasteful, as he's the only character you have who is able to do things like that. His homing projectiles are really much less effective for this than anything else he does. But as we can see, baiting the opponent into certain types of counterattack is much easier once you've reached this point of the match. Generally, you should not underestimate how hard it actually is to get in on people who have managed to put a certain specific distance between you and them. Especially once you've lost your assist options.
One can, over time, learn the precise spacing at which your opponent finds it hardest to make ground forward on you. And then, rather than trying to hit them, maintain that spacing.
Time to begin the match.
Seeking the spacing where your opponent's attacking is difficult, rather than the spacing in which you can launch a tricky attack of your own, may seem counterintuitive, especially in a game that is generally so based around offense.
Get ready. Fight it out.
They're ready to fix that. But I suppose there really is no way to tell the game that you're streaming, is there? Vegeta is one of those characters who has this ability above most in the game. Vegeta Blue, that is. Since he has a low that avoids specific things and functions as a catch for the opponent's punches, as well as the other basic response, it's difficult to get in on him when he's really trying to hold you out. Whereas with Taboo, while he does cover the entire space, it is a little bit more tricky if your opponent knows where to put themselves. Generally, the same thing comes up when you're not sure whether or not it's time to convert into something else. In scrambles, you're usually better off pressing the button to switch your character than actually going for any of your specials, as you can't be confident in those.
なめるなよファイナルステッププレゼントだどこへおしまいだ俺を
Oh, too many times to say that once.
俺様一人いれば十分だ。ゆっくり眠らせてやる。二度と起きないようにな。礼は言わんぞ。この戦いを通じて俺はもっと強くなった。
So if you find yourself interested in this game but don't really feel like you know what you're doing beyond the basics, that's probably the next thing to move on to. Pick the characters you like, pick the characters you can play well in neutral.
A fierce showdown is about to begin.
And for now, ignore the concept of specifically seeking assists for the purpose of their actual assist. At least until you're relatively certain that the characters you're playing don't have good ways to open up the opponent or good synergy in terms of switching and continuing their combos and positions from switches.
Are you ready?
It is true that not many characters in the game benefit too much or can do too much from the position where they're called in to finish a combo in the air. That said, there are some characters who are not very strong as standard assists but do have versatility, so try not to discount them too early. Another tendency is that they are often very good at playing neutral in ways that other characters can't keep up with. This helps you even more in situations where the combo or opening your opponent up has not gone quite the way you planned, but you did still manage to get a stray hit. Those characters are often better at converting those stray hits into a good situation than the ones who have really powerful combos. The thing you're generally looking for is a high level of moves that go in multiple different directions, that the character can attack basically anywhere in front of them, sometimes under, sometimes better. Either that, or their moves in front of them, especially in the air, have large hitboxes that are unlikely to miss when applied to most opponents.
As you can see, while someone does take damage in these situations, he doesn't really care that much about the little damage he takes. If you've chosen to zone, it's because you're up against an opponent who really can't convert off that sort of attack very well. Making the largest candidates for characters you'd want to zone other characters who don't have good conversions off connecting with their super dash while you are in the air. Who either need the assist from their team to convert into anything, a super that they can't count on, or for you to make a mistake. This is also true for standard zoners like Gohan. Even though Gohan does not generally jump into the air, the spacing that Gohan puts himself at, plus the fact that most of his moves super dashes, mean your opponent must use a different counter zoning strategy, which he has an easy way to beat, and when he doesn't, he also doesn't take that much damage.
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess!
Last time we tried to play this match by switching into Frieza. This time we're going to try to give 18 her space, to demonstrate what I was mentioning before. 18 is actually the character who you switch to when you actually want to apply a bit of pressure, but not necessarily from right up in their face. But against Broly, who doesn't have a strong attack directly up and forward, you have some better options with her specifically. While she does not have a lot of strong attacks of that type on her own, calling her brother does change the setup quite a lot. It's not enough to just attempt to zone by calling him though. The idea is that you must move. You can see that opponent using that sort of direct forward motion would have easily been countered by any of her other techniques, or by simply calling Frieza.
Frieza has a similar ability, but his attacks don't get down as quickly, making him better for dealing with people who would want to jump. However, he does have the same mix-ups, he just has to use different methods. Basically, you hit the button earlier so that you get the second hit of it. Piccolo actually lacks this ability, even though he can toss up with his jumping medium. He's simply easier to anti-air because of his spacing, and it's unreliable toss-up. Therefore, it's also important to learn to measure the spaces relative to each character if you want to play a team with such high interchangeability. Basically, the fact that you can't just use the same thing with each one of them after the knockdown means you have to build up the synergy from scratch and therefore test it that way. This is why it takes so long to be sure whether or not you're playing the correct team for you or not, as it's easy to overlook a lot of possibilities they have based on trying to do the same thing with each character, or just using some basic stuff that you didn't think of before.
終わりだ。
ありがとうございます。
覚悟はいいか。無駄だ。甘い。行くぞ。なんだと。ビッグバン。終わりだ。逃げられるか。こんなものか。そうだ。
If nothing else, of course, you get to be very, very intimidating, which actually has another use altogether. When your opponent has a lot of meter, and you know you're most likely going to lose a character, i.e. they don't have a lot of recoverable health, intimidating them into using a super or bigger move on that character can be somewhat demoralizing.
行くよ17号。分かった分かった。行くよ17号。分かった分かった。
ここを見ている。
やっ。驚いたよ。やるね。驚いたよ。
点数をつけ。
行くよ。
そんなものか。するな。そろそろ死にたいだろ。長いつだろ。お前点数をつけるとすればここを見ていろ。そろそろ死にたいだろ。調子に乗る。調子に乗るな。調子に。ファイナルスペシャル。これで終わりだ。この俺。
That, for example, is managing to get the opponent to use a level 3 on a character who you didn't intend to keep in anyway.
行くよ17号。分かった分かった。じゃあね、バイ。またな。
自然は大切にしろよ。
へえ、あんたなかなかやるじゃないか。じゃあ次は本気を出しても構わないね。
The battle's about to start. Good luck.
As with everything else, playing in this way requires you to rethink how to use your Sparking Blast. Obviously, it should still be used as a wake-up option, but as you will often have a lot more meter to play with, you may be able to substitute your level 3 in those situations more often. And your opponents are likely to be a little bit more desperate. At higher levels, or if you face someone who has managed to practice just this and not much else, you will face players who have good jump knockdown pressure. But as jump knockdowns often suffer against level 3s anyway, it's not one of the types of knockdown pressure you have to worry about the most. Kendo is generally harder to zone than most characters. However, as with most characters who have strong vectors around zoning, you should more so expect to need to use your heavy buttons to discourage him or when he misses the space. Assists will cover most of the rest of that, and for a character like Krillin, this is really just a matter of attrition. And generally it's a war of attrition that Kid has trouble winning. Vegeta is easier to zone in the standard way, but since he spends so much time in the air and has so many good options from there, you should expect the super dash problem to pick up. He's much harder to zone for Gohan, and harder to pin down in general actually. Fortunately, Gohan's relatively strong, crouch heavy, and forward heavy tend to make up the space in this matchup. As for the mirror, there's not much to say. Mirror match zoning often comes down to who has either the most weaker or superior zoning skill outright. However, since Gohan at full range does not have a projectile that will easily get to a strikeable zone on himself from the air, it's a very basic sort of zoning.
スーパーサイヤ人ゴッドを超えた力、勉強させてもらいました。本当に大切なものを守るには強くなくちゃいけないんだ。
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble!
What? お前から血祭りにあげてやる。
Ready? Let's go!
なんなんだ？聞かんぞ。聞かんぞ。
次は助けんからな。クズ。俺様が。リストバック。調子に乗るな。こんなものだ。行くぞ。当て直す。行くぞ。あだだ。行くぞ。あだだ。
どうしたこっちで
見切った無駄だ行くぞあだだ
Generally, it will be harder to build up this sort of thing, since obviously, in order to get good returns out of a switching-based strategy rather than an assist-based one, you have to actually manage to open your opponent up without any assists. Probably on our next stream we will go over which characters we understand at the moment. We'll have strengths in one direction or another.
スーパーサイヤ人ブルーとなった俺の敵ではない。その痛み決して忘れるな。
A fierce showdown is about to begin!
So, last time we realized, yes, 18 can get in, but what does she do once she's in? If she manages to open the opponent up and flow through with the jumping combo, normally she can just switch in Frieza to finish things off more. But what can Piccolo do? Piccolo's movement in the air is a little less tricky and a little slower in many ways. You spend a lot more time trying to trick the opponent into doing particular things that he can deal with. However, as you can see, neutral jumping is a much better solution given where his hitboxes are.
その直なんですって
So, again, we have the opponent who is effectively attacking head-on. It's easier for characters who have this sort of attack to resolve the situation. As this attack type does not at all interact with their actual other style of attack. Thereby forcing the player to want to super dash. At times they may not even be able to do so safely. But what can Piccolo do about the neutral jumping problem? He does have various empty jump mix-ups he could use from various positions. Something that is not so strong or available to other characters of the same type. Ah, it's not right that way.
無駄な抵抗はもう終わりか。貴様の攻撃など私にとっては蚊に刺されたようなものさ。
Brace yourself for the coming battle!
In this game, the premier zoners generally don't have any trouble out-zoning other characters. They're given a lot of tools in order to make it easier for them. Some of these are easier to deal with than others, but for the most part, it's the other characters on your team that you have to worry about. A zoning battle is a long drawn-out thing, and if all of your characters are meant to play defensively, it makes it very difficult to keep this sort of thing up. Your best bet, therefore, is to make your opponent really hesitant about all sorts of things. particularly helps because my characters have such extremely long normals for these things. But an opponent can only keep up this level of offensive pressure for so long. They'll either tire themselves out or run out of meter to do it with. And while it may not feel that way, the opponent actually tiring themselves out mentally is a very real way to win matches like this. As they play, they have to take more and more risks, and these risks lead to worse and worse situations for them in the long term. It's particularly difficult when those risks they're taking don't lead to much damage. Their tension increases more and more, and yours does not. As I said, eventually they'll get tired. Just the way that you feel stressed out while they're doing all of this stuff because you don't want to get opened up and lose. Your opponent is the one having to do the attacking, so they're under much more stress than you, especially if they're down to one character. Taking small amounts of damage as the cost you pay for not having to go in and risking making bigger mistakes is just something that happens. There are many moves in games that are difficult to react to even if you're familiar with them. but don't necessarily hurt you all that much or put your opponent in good positions. You can consider it to be the Dragon Ball Fighter's equivalent of take the throw. There are certain situations on Wake Up or in other situations where you want to defend, and in a regular game you would just get thrown. In this game, sometimes you want to not defend because defense requires you to devote a certain amount of time to letting your opponent try to do certain things. If you're defending and they do an unreactable move, but you block it, sometimes that move is more advantageous to their positioning because you blocked it than because you actually got hit. Or, in many cases, tried a response that wasn't possible in time. Note, however, that there are specific moves in this game that are treated about the same as if you had actually gotten hit normally. Those specifically being the ones that we normally had actually told you to use. In short, when you're in that situation, you should not generally be trying to counter your opponent with either your own beam attack or your standing or crouching heavy. The concept is to use a move that will make your opponent rethink how they make their approaches, and doesn't take too much damage if you do it the other way. But not every character has moves like this. For example, we see here Vegeta Blue actually has basically no moves of this type. He's either going forward, baiting, or actually attacking normally. His single key blast is no deterrent, so he either perfectly spaces his big bang attack or calls an assist. On the other hand, generally, if you manage to get enough of an advantage that your opponent is scared of you, you generally don't need Vegeta Blue in on point and not actually attack. He's a much more stressful character when he is attacking, and the opponent is at low life and knows that you don't fear doing risky things so that you get hurt a bit. In short, if your character lacks strong mix-ups, sometimes just standing there is best. You see it once again demonstrated there that if the opponent reacts too slowly to Shilin zoning, he absolutely can get out of a bunch of things. Fortunately, as I mentioned, Vegeta Blue is really hard to zone out.
これがスーパーサイヤ人ブルーだ。こっちだ。なめるなよ。こっちだ。しまった。さあこれでも食らえ。調子に乗るな。なめるなよ。なんでも知らんか。せんな。見切った。
世界もみんなの笑顔も俺が守ってみせる。
So we're going to do one more rotation around before ending the stream for tonight. Tomorrow will most likely, if not surely, be Dead or Alive 5 content. As we don't have finalization on the bots for anything else, and no cutters to demonstrate. That will once again be an open round, loser stays, US East Coast. But again, we don't generally care too much about the live unless it's terrible, so if you're anywhere in that general area, you can give it a try. Broly's oppressive nature means that he is one of those characters who really does just get attacking in certain situations. But this isn't to say that he has a lot of ways of opening you up, meaning that if you are patient about it and block for most of what Broly does, he either has to lock you down so you stay blocking, but not get anything off it, or give up a lot of it, and take the big hits. He's also easier to deal with in most situations by using Vanish, even though he often is moving forward in a way that would allow him to block it. From the Broly side, it's very good to mix it up between actually attacking and just throwing out his zoning, because no one wants to wait to let Broly do things. And the fact that they don't want to wait makes it easier to control it. Well, for him to control them. Cell is therefore a great addition to this team in that he can actually defeat opponents without actually letting them do anything. The disadvantage therefore being strong enough that you'd end up not wanting to block and building up that feeling, and then Broly comes back in and you have to. Baz noted it doesn't take too much patience It's more an interpretation of your opponent's rhythm than anything else.
Vegeta, win!
So let's try Piccolo from the other side as our final match of the night. Piccolo isn't so good at keeping Broly out, and he isn't so good at getting in. But what he is good at is doing nothing. This may seem a little counterproductive, except you can easily remember who is on Piccolo's team in this case. We were talking about managing to get in, get the combos, switch things onward, but what if you just didn't do any of that?
It's all or nothing. Fight!
You can see that the opponent eventually just realizes this is not a good idea and switches because it's a better idea to switch overall. Giving Piccolo a match where he has much better chance of being effective directly. The team has problems in this matchup because if the opponent keeps on moving too much, her lack of strong air normal relative to her position often makes it difficult for her to pull through things. Specifically, she targets very specifically in the air, making it more difficult to deal with it. But Frieza has more or less the same fake jumps as Piccolo. 18 does not generally use these to the same effect. Mostly because the opponent doesn't have to worry about other actions she can take from very far away. With Frieza, you have to constantly worry about other things Frieza could be intending to do from that range while in the air. So he gets to jump in more freely. But against this opponent, he faces the same problem.
懐かしい顔だね
He has too many moves that track, forcing him to take advantage of things only when he's sure the thing can stop, or when he's ready to just go for a very specific type of pressure. You can force this type of opponent to miss attacks, but it's difficult in a way that would make it frustrating to try to play that out. That said, that's brought us to the end of our stream for tonight. Join us tomorrow, therefore, for Dead or Alive action, and on Monday for Mishmashing Lounge in Street Fighter V. Tuesday will be our Guilty Gear Tuesday train, and Wednesday most likely more Street Fighter content, as we have not yet bought Under Night in Birth, yet latest on all team members' systems. Note that that is on sale this week, and therefore you should pick it up if you find yourself interested in the game. It is half off at the moment on PlayStation Store. Therefore, this has been Rillian 142MK. Good night, everyone.